So welcome everyone, as Arlen said. My name is Crystal Washa, and I'm excited to be here working and really presenting with you on college and career readiness practices that promote this kind of this K-12 continuum. When we think about this K-12 continuum, it's really around what are the strategic practices that need to occur as early as kindergarten and as early as preschool too, to really put kids on a trajectory or path of developing key dispositions in terms of this agency, this being able to really have a growth mindset, the skills that's needed, and also academics. And we know that this practice really doesn't happen by chance, but that schools and administrators and everyone who's involved in the life of a child has to really be thinking about how does this work play out in a child's life so that they are prepared for college and career readiness. And so before we move forward, I'd like to find out who's in the room. As Arlen mentioned, there's a question tab. So just type in who are you, and then what are you hoping to learn from this professional development? And I'll give you about 15 seconds.
And Crystal, I've actually got a poll on the screen where they can click the option to select who's in the room.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. So I see that the majority are principals, and then our next tier of folks that are here are administrator directors, and then we have about 15% of others, and that's awesome because it also shows that the people in the room are really have an influence and have some type of influence around how kids are developed for college and career readiness. Thank you. So with that being said, whenever we've done this professional development, we always ask the first question, and I won't ask you to type into the box, but just to think for 10 seconds around what messages were communicated to you about achievement, going to college, having a career, thinking about your college and career path, and then how did these messages shape your journey? So just think for about 10 seconds around those questions. So whenever we've talked to people in the professional development, there's different types of scenarios that have played out in the lives of people when it comes to college and career readiness. And so in our audience are usually teachers, educated, people that have various degrees, high levels of degrees. And a lot of the conversations center on college was never really talked about. So there's a percentage of people in the audience that say college was never really talked about in my household. And if that was the case, it's usually someone before them sometimes didn't go to college. And the expectation was that it wasn't really talked about. There was an expectation that you should go. But in terms of how do we develop this path, this conversation, these overall dialogues in the room around college and career readiness, it really wasn't developed in the household. Then there's another percentage that says that although we might have not had people who have gone to college before us, it was an expectation. There were conversations around what type of careers you would develop or you would tackle. It was an expectation around what college, what career you would go to, and then also too it's always a tier in the PD that says that if it wasn't developed in the family, then there were people within the school, a counselor or someone like that, who really had the expectation that you will go to college, you will have a career, and these are the expectations around that. And so in today's professional development, we have three outcomes. We really want to understand the why in terms of the importance of college and career readiness for all students. And when we say all students, it's really students that are within all the tier categories, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Why it's important to really prepare them for this college and career readiness. And then the next outcomes are really the what in terms of the first one is to identify how school, sorry, let me go back. So to identify how schools can adopt this college and career ready standards. And when we think about the second one, it's really thinking about what practices should happen in the classrooms, in the academic lives of children, in terms of even if children are going home, what are the practices that they should be engaging in on the computer, within the homeworks that we give to really prepare them for this college and career readiness, and then to learn the school-wide practices that promote this. So the identify phase is the schools and it's the classrooms, it's the academics, and the learn is the school-wide overall practices that occur. For some schools, there's NWEA, there's school-wide incentives around preparing kids for college and career readiness, and then for other schools, there's presenters that's brought in to really prepare around career and college readiness. So we'll identify and we'll think about those outcomes. And then our agenda for today is to really examine college and career data. There's a lot of data that's out there by ACT, especially from graduating class of 2017, around our kids prepared for college and career. So we'll spend some time examining that. And then we'll observe and read the dispositions that support college access in terms of what are these key dispositions, because we tend to think that it's a lot of academics, but it's really three key skills or dispositions. It's the agencies, it's the skill level itself in terms of the mindset that's needed, and it's also the academics. And as I mentioned, we'll spend some time thinking through the math and ELA standards, and then reflect on the mindset that's needed for this college and career access. So let's spend some time thinking through our college and career readiness data. I'm going to show you some data, and then I'm just going to pose some questions. And then at the end of my 3 slides with the data, then I'll ask you to think through, what is this data telling you? So this first slide we'll see, as I mentioned, ACT is really the assessment in which a lot of data is collected to determine if students, if when they graduate, are they college and career ready? And so we see when we look at the points over here that according to the 2017 graduating class, the percentage rose. It had previously dropped to 20.8, but then it rose to 21. So that's good. I mean, that's an indicator that the composite scores are definitely increasing for college and career graduates that are graduating from high school. But then when we look at the next bullet, in terms of, it says that less than a fourth of graduates who qualify as underserved, and that underserved is really the category of students that are also in the free and reduced price lunch, some of our tier 2 and tier 3 students that need additional interventions. And it's not speaking to students that are in the AP classes, the honor classes, but it's speaking to the underserved students that according to their data, less than a fourth met or surpassed 3 or 4 of the ACT college readiness benchmarks. And so when we look at the indicators right here, we can see that science is, in terms of 37% of those graduating students in 2017, really passed the science indicators that says that you are ready for college and career. We see that our highest indicator of students who passed was 61. And although we would say that 61 is high, it's still pretty low in terms of students who are underserved being ready for college and career ready. And we can see that, that in terms of when we take the average of all 4 subjects, 27% of students in the underserved category were ready for college and career readiness. And so just think for a moment in terms of, what is that data really speaking to you? Let's move to another slide. Now, this slide speaks to participation by subject area. The first one did too, but this breaks it down in terms of ethnicity across all 4 subjects: math, reading, science, and also English. And so within our subjects, ACT has consistently found that students who take the core courses, they're more likely to be ready for college. And those core courses, as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily the AP honors courses, it's it's also the selective enrollment courses, but it's really around students that have had consistency, 4 years of English, 3 years of math, social studies, and science. So in other words, they've met their indicators to say that you have passed high school ready by taking these courses. And I'll say not just taking the courses, but also meeting the standards that's indicated within those courses. And so when we look at our our indicators over here, we see that in the previous slide, it spoke to science being the lowest indicator. But in this slide right here, it shows again that in all of our ethnic groups, science was one of the lowest categories in the performance of where our ethnic groups performed. We see that African Americans scored at least 11%, met the indicators in science. And we can see that Pacific Islanders, 21%, and our Hispanic population, 22%. And so when I look at it, I think in terms of immediately what sparked my mind was that in many of our schools and in many of our academic areas that serve students, sometimes science itself is one of the least subjects that students are exposed to until they get to sixth, seventh, and eighth. And so a lot of times in K through the fifth grade, our science is really not taught, or it's not necessarily integrated well within the other subjects. And we hear a lot of times educators may say, well, we don't have time to teach science, or we're not given a time, really a suitable time to really teach and to expand on science learning for children. So we've all heard of Advance Illinois, and Advance Illinois is one of the think tanks that really works with schools to think through a host of different areas, whether it's reading and math, but there's also a lot of research that Advance Illinois is doing to think through where are kids and where are they really progressing, and how are schools doing with progressing kids to be college and career ready. And Advance Illinois has a central goal that says by 2025, Illinois aims to ensure that 60% of adults attain a post-secondary credential. And so when I was looking in terms of why is that a specific indicator, a post-secondary credential is not necessarily a 4-year college. It could be a 2-year junior college. It could be a trade school, but at least having, and when they say 60%, Advance Illinois is saying that 60% have the opportunity or the advantage to say that I've passed my core courses within high school, and I have the opportunity or a chance to attend and to choose between a trade school, a 4-year, or a junior college. And so they know that that's really not an easy indicator, and they have some steps, and this right here indicates where we are today and what Advance Illinois hopes to do to really start preparing and helping adults reach this 60% credential attainment. And so we see that really, and it says right here, complete 8th grade ready for high school, that's 36%. And so at the 8th grade, and we know that the 8th grade is really that threshold that says that at 8th grade, students should be on a path to at least having the advantage of taking algebraic courses, to taking English and being successful in their reading ELA courses. But Advanced Illinois found that only 36% are really ready for high school coursework, and that's in all of Illinois, not just schools that are South Side, North Side, but all of Illinois. And then if we look at this indicator right here, only 61% enroll in post-secondary education. So we hear a lot in terms of we're preparing kids to be college and career ready, but in terms of really actually enrolling in post-secondary education, only 61%. And this is from 2017 data. And then this is really an interesting indicator right here, interesting data point, that it says only 37% persist through post-secondary graduation. So right here where it says 61% are actually enrolling, a small percentage of students are actually persisting through post-secondary graduation. And so when I did some background research too, that 37% is not just necessarily around academics. That's a good point. It really speaks to students not necessarily having the finances to complete their post-secondary graduation, students not having a scholarship that they need to complete it, and also the academics themselves to really be able to persist to complete a 4-year college experience. So yes. So thinking about this data right here, I just want you to think around, what does all of this data tell you? And then there's a question box, and I'm just going to ask you just to jot in the question box, What's coming to your mind when you think about all of this data that's been shared? I'm going to ask you to take about maybe 30 seconds to jot in the question box. And then Arlen, I'll ask you, is there any trends that are coming up within our question box around this data?
Yeah, it looks like Lauren says this data shows us that the majority of students are not prepared for college and careers.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Lauren. Yes.
And Keith says
Anything else?
high school requirements for course load are essential. Districts need to follow up with students post-grad to help them grind through college.
Wow. Yes. And that's interesting. Follow up with postgrads. Mm,
And
great,
Matthew says
great, great.
only 27% are college ready for all subjects.
Yes. That's interesting. That's some interesting data. Anything else that's coming up?
And Bridget was surprised to see that while only 31% are college and career ready, 61% enroll in post-secondary.
Yes, exactly. So really interesting statistics in terms of, and I hear the trends in terms of the trend language saying that yes, this is really striking data that's being that we're viewing. But it's really interesting that with this striking data, someone said that we need to follow up with students after this after high school to determine how they're faring. And that's a really interesting perspective because it really pushes the lens for schools to think about when they're out there in high schools. How do we keep up with them? What's the program, or how does our counselor keep up with kind of this group of students to determine how are they faring well? And then also too, it speaks to how have we as a high school done to really prepare kids for college. And so it just gives that high school more data. Great points. Thank you. So I asked this question, and it's not a question for you to respond to, but just to reflect on. What is college and career readiness? And as you're reflecting, I'll talk for a minute of why this question is really essential, because in many schools, whenever I ask this question, there's a different types of response. Many response centers on college and career readiness just being about academics, that children are prepared to enter, that they've taken their 4-year their 4-year English core subjects, their math core subjects, their foreign language subjects, and so that indicates that they're ready for college. But then a lot of times the skills and the dispositions itself are not really entered into the conversation. And the skills and the disposition, when we go back and when we think about this 37% of persisting, yes, there's data that indicates that students might have not had enough of funds to finish their college, but the persistence also speaks to the mindset that's needed to persist through college. And so when we think about this definition of what is college and career readiness, college and career readiness is defined as an academically and socially prepared student who is ready for post-secondary education without the need for remedial coursework. There's a lot of research out there that indicates that when students are finished with their high school coursework, that sometimes they enter school and they enter college and they have to take that year of remedial coursework. And so college and career definition says that they enter college being prepared and being academically prepared, but also socially with the skills and the disposition, and also the SEL that's needed. And one SEL indicator that always enters the conversation for students being ready to be college and career is the self-management, in terms of how do students, are they able to, when they enter school, are they able to manage their time? Are they able to manage their emotions? Are they able to manage the multitasking that's really demanded of students within college? And so that social emotional indicator of self-management is really key. And so for that, you'll find that many schools they'll build in the SEL component of self-management as an indicator to really support kids to be or to gather the information around being self-managed. Another indicator in terms of what does it mean to be career ready is that students possess both the necessary knowledge and technical skills needed for employment in their desired career field. And so usually for that indicator, that's a high school that has post-secondary skills or coursework ingrained in the high school experience itself. Okay. So what's happening at the national and regional work for college and career readiness? As we speak right now. And when I think about that, this work really reflects the think tanks, the Advanced Illinois, and even at the regional level. And the regional level is ISB, and also Advanced Illinois at the regional too, what's happening in districts. So at the national level, standards and indicators created in terms of they're still working on thinking about, yes, there are standards that have been created, but then are students really meeting these standards? And so a lot of assessments, NAEP is really thinking around how do we actually use our assessments to determine are kids really progressing to college and career readiness? And then two, at the national level, embedded in the ESSA plan. We understand that even in the ESSA plan that was generated, that school systems had to think about how are we actually preparing kids to be college and career readiness? And if that's not an indicator, then how do we begin that conversation? And then it's aligned in our Common Core ELA and math. And when you look at the Common Core ELA and math, indicators around building evidence from the text, discussion, having complex text, it's a national indicator that's thinking through how do we prepare kids as early as kindergarten to really be able to build evidence from the text so that it becomes a muscle. At the regional level, states are working to adopt benchmark assessments in terms of these assessments that align to Common Core assessments, and also assessments that show that at this particular level, this child has taken this assessment and we can speak to him or her being college and career readiness based on this information. Growth assessments. If we're taking NWEA, some schools are doing iReady, there's the growth indicator that's there to show are they progressing. And then ISB development of the PACE framework, in terms of that framework that shows are kids ready. So now let's move into school planning. We've spent some time looking at data. What's the school planning that's needed to be at college and career readiness itself? As early as kindergarten, all the way to high school when I'm actually graduating and I'm ready to move on. So if we go back, I have a video here, and the video speaks to a school's perspective. It's a short video that I'll ask you to watch and just think through what has the school thought about to really help kids really be geared towards college and career readiness and to meet those expectations. It's about 1 minute long.
So this is the lucky winner right there.
Yeah.
No matter a student's age,
It looks like your resume.
all eyes are on the same stage.
I just bought my cap and gown the other day, so I'm really excited.
Denver Public Schools strives for every graduating student to be college and career ready. The journey toward that
12, 13, 14.
starts earlier than you think.
College comes up because we talk about where we're going to be in 10 years and how we're going to get there.
Jessica Studley is a 4th grade teacher at Brown International.
Making sure that they feel successful in a classroom community, that they can trust their classmates, and that they feel safe enough to take those risks.
On this day, the risk
$30, 10 or 20.
is applying fractions to real life by way of picking out a cell phone plan.
They're good phones, but a lot of money.
So it's not just about what the right answer is. A lot of times it's about the process.
And in that process, they're developing personal success factors, the life skills they'll need to take on life's challenges. Think risk-taking, grit, and perseverance.
How they are working together in these small groups. Are they able to overcome their differences of opinion?
We were all concentrated, yes.
And can they defend their thinking?
I think we found our winner.
Yeah.
It's great to see these kids thrive.
Thriving kids who grow into ambitious young adults.
I'm going to really try to get good grades.
Well, my school really.
Okay, so I only wanted to play a minute of that because that video speaks to at least 3 indicators that we will move into next in terms of the grit that's needed. We heard the teacher talk about the grit and the perseverance that speaks to the disposition. Then we saw kids engaging and conversations with their peers in terms of the academic discourse that's needed. We saw them do a real life conversation around fractions. So a lot of this application of academics to real life experience. So the agency that's needed, the grit, the perseverance, as well as the academics. Let me go here. So right here, in terms of the school planning for college and career readiness, this grid right here speaks to on this side, in terms of the left side, these are a lot of the skills that schools are doing, the planning for college and career readiness that schools are doing to prepare students. Right here on the right hand side speaks to at the grade level that this is happening. So as I'm talking through this, I'll talk through this for a minute. Just think through, what is your school doing to really support some of this college and career readiness? And we'll see that at the pre-K through 12th grade level, there's a lot of inference in terms of this career awareness, where a person is brought in with a career, and the person talks about the job roles that he or her is doing to really prepare themselves in their roles. All the way to, in terms of right here, the K-12, what are the post-secondary aspirations in terms of, and when this, and with this indicator, what does college look like as early as kindergarten? So schools are taking the lead to say, so when you go to college, when you're prepared for college, what does this look like? So at the 9th through 12th, we'll see that in many of our schools, this is where the options information comes in. And I've read that a lot of times this is brought at the 9th through 12th grade level, because by the 9th grade level, the indicators should say that by 9th grade, students will know whether they're well prepared, and if they're not prepared, what do they need to do to get prepared? And so with that, different options, schools bring in different types of speakers, different types of career strategists, different types of career models to kids to really start preparing them to think about, what do I need to do to be prepared? The environmental expectations are very similar in terms of where schools are thinking about just environment. What type of environment do you want for yourselves to, or do you need to be prepared to be college and career readiness? Academic planning. This academic speaks to in terms of college and career readiness, and it also speaks to the Common Core standards. And then right here, employability skills. This really speaks to the internships that happen at high schools to prepare kids, or the externships in terms of what's happening in the high schools to prepare kids, all the way to financial literacy. Financial literacy being in terms of really working with your checkbook, really thinking about, how do I finance college and career, a lot of this financial literacy that happens as early as 9th through 12th grade. So thinking about this right here, you've heard me talk a lot around the dispositions needed to succeed in college and career. All three, the research around this say that all three of these are extremely important. It's not one over the other one. One does not have a higher leverage over the other one. If I'm thinking about my knowledge, it's thinking about the rigorous content that my kids are prepared as early as kindergarten to prepare them. And schools are preparing them. We've heard of Common Core state standards. And of course, I'll speak to this one right here, applied knowledge. We saw in the video where the teacher said that kids were working on fractions, and then they were applying those fractions to real world scenarios. So I always, when I'm talking with administrators and talking with teachers, a conversation comes up in terms of when kids are interacting with the college and career standards, and also when in Common Core standards, how do they apply those to real world situations? Because when they're applying those to real world situations, that speaks towards that I'm learning this for this purpose, that this is a real life situation, that I'm learning fractions, I'm learning bar graphs, I'm learning how to build evidence from the text, because I'm going to need this in the long run. This right here, the skills category. So we've heard a lot around problem solving and critical thinking, but this right here is, and it's not one over the other one. The goal is that all of these skills are taken into context, and students are working through each one of these skills as early as kindergarten all the way to 12th grade to really build this muscle around problem solving and working collaboratively with groups. that's really essential for college and career readiness, because we know in many courses that students are going to take, a lot of the courses will be geared towards students working collaboratively with groups, and them being able to manage their time to produce a product. A student being able to think through that when I'm working with the group, I'm held accountable for the product that I'm producing. This next one is dispositions, and this disposition really speaks to the self-efficacy, the resiliency, and the self-control that's needed. Self-efficacy meaning that I can advocate for myself when I'm finding that I'm not producing the right grade level to keep me on task in this class. In many of the students who go to college and career, we find that when I've looked at research and when I've talked to a lot of college and career counselors, that students may have the knowledge, but if they don't have the advocacy to advocate for themselves, then that can lead them down a path of dropping out of college. And self-efficacy is not necessarily advocating and going to the teacher to talk about their grade, but it's really determining that in my mindset that, oh, I've produced a C so far. Now I need to change my path by doing this, by studying, that they have a path to say that, okay, these are the skills that I need to do in order to do well in this class. And of course, self-control is really key. Building academic resiliency itself. So when we look at in this slide, we're going to explore for a minute around the dispositions that's needed, because you'll see resiliency. And notice before when I showed you the advanced Illinois is that although students are getting into college, only 61% are actually finishing college. And so a lot of the research in terms of the Carol Dweck, in terms of the grit disposition, always it speaks to that in order for kids to really come out of college within not necessarily the 4-year time, but in order to resile against college, they have to have this growth mindset. And they have to have a mindset that I'm going to develop this resiliency to tackle subjects, to advocate for myself. And so whenever we see resiliency, it really speaks to students' performance, both positively and negatively. And having a resilient mindset helps students to bounce back in the face of adversity. We know that when kids go to college, we know that when they have certain coursework and when they're exposed to even strategies that they're not familiar with, sometimes our students will fall back and not necessarily have a bounce back strategy to come back. And remember, I talked about self-efficacy. Sometimes our students won't necessarily go to the college and career counselor, but they'll subside and they won't know how to bounce back. Resiliency speaks towards that when kids are entering college, they need to have this bounce back strategy to go to someone, to advocate for themselves, and this mindset that's needed to apply effort to really push myself through this. For many schools that are teaching resiliency, they're either teaching it within the core academic subjects, or we find that they're teaching growth mindset in an academic coursework somewhere within the school day to push kids to develop this mindset. When we think about academically resilient students, they all have a certain mindset and standpoint. They view setbacks as an opportunity for learning. They have a number of self-regulation strategies at their disposal. And I love this word self-regulation because that's actually a socio-emotional learning context word itself. And some of those self-regulation strategies say it's bounce back. It's also around time management. It's also stopping to reflect, because reflection is a self-regulated strategy too. It's reflection to really take time to situate yourself and to say that here are the steps that I'm going to take to bounce back from this. And it's also not necessarily reflecting, but it's also around developing that plan and acting on that plan. So if I can summarize self-regulation, reflection, developing a plan, acting on the plan. And then resilient students believe in their ability to learn and perform. Keywords right there. Academically resilient students, they know that it's about the mindset and the skills. And the mindset and the skills allow students to look beyond look beyond short-term concerns to longer-term and higher-order goals. That's a huge word right there, higher-order goals. That higher-order goals speak towards that I'm able to set goals long-term and short-term, and I'm able to check in on my goals to see if I'm making them. Here's an example. A student who enters, I'll say a math class, an algebra class, and they realize that after the first subject, I didn't do so well in that subject. I wanted to get an A, but instead I got maybe a C in that on that first exam. I'm sorry, not subject, but first exam. So I need to set a goal for myself. I need to go back, and with that goal, I need to develop some action plans. And with that action plans, that I need to think through, when am I able to assess? Am I able to assess whether I'm meeting the action plan, and what intervals am I going to assess whether I'm meeting the action plan? These are kind of adult behaviors that students, 18-year-olds, have to develop when they reach college in order to be able to achieve and succeed. And then academically resilient students withstand challenges and setbacks to persevere towards their goals. That spoke to, the last one spoke towards the, I'm able to develop these type of assessment stands that I could assess where am I in my plan, and what do I need to do to move forward. So thinking about this, academically resilient students, um, it says, so off to the side, this really speaks towards a lot of the psychological things that academically resilient students need to develop. I talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of the short term, the longer term, the ability to persevere towards their goals, and to be able to set goals. But this doesn't come naturally to students. It doesn't come naturally to adults. A lot of times for us to be this way, we have to be involved with people who we look towards that can set us on this course or this plan to be academically goal setting. And so when you think about your school or your setting, I want you to think about this question. What interventions and recommendations align to our beliefs about building academically resilient students? I won't ask you to write it down, but I'll ask you this question. When you think about an academically resilient student, what interventions do we need in order to create this academically resilient model? Or what recommendations would you say is needed to create this student? So I'm going to ask you just to think for about maybe 5 seconds. Now, if you thought in terms of interventions, particular coursework that's needed, you're right on track. Social emotional learning that's needed, you're right on track. And when I say social emotional learning, the social emotional learning that's ingrained within our particular coursework to teach students self-management skills, self-efficacy skills. If you're thinking in terms of it ingrained within the academic core subject of Common Core, you're absolutely right. That Common Core is really built to teach students how to resil with locating evidence from the text, engaging in dialogue, writing about it, building your stamina around complex text. And these are, in a sense, interventions they're part of the core subjects, but they're also interventions that's needed to build students to become academically resilient students. So our takeaways from this section: how teachers can build, or how schools can build, this academically resilient students. One is definitely setting the standards for this, that it's not just academics that students need, but it's also this disposition that's needed and skills that's needed, to set the high expectation that kids will not necessarily just attend, but they'll actually finish school. Attention to students' psychology. I spoke towards that with the dispositions and the skills, the resiliency, the self-efficacy, and the self-management. Cognitive scaffolding, I love this word. In terms of cognitive scaffolding, is really the dispositions needed for students to achieve well. An example of that would be conversations with other kids, dialogue around real world examples, throwing out a question that a student is answering that they have to build evidence and they're answering with peers. Socratic seminar is a form of scaffolding. So students are ready to tackle these complex texts. Motivational scaffolding, that within my classroom and within my school, I'm motivating kids to really be able to achieve. And the sense of belonging, that I belong to a society, a safe space so that I can take my risk. So how do we adopt this within our daily ELA and math practices? It's not enough for schools to be able to do this whole school, but in terms of within the daily classroom of educators, and I say these not necessarily passive, but very aggressive, that these are really key indicators that have to be ingrained within our classroom. Mathematical practice, that's a common core expectation for math. That when teachers are teaching math, that they're engaging kids in all of these strands of the mathematical practices, that kids are modeling with math, that they've got tools within their classrooms, that they're not just the teacher doing the heavy scaffolding, but kids are coming to the board and they're modeling how they got to an answer. That teaches the perseverance and the skills that's needed to push through. Also, too, that they're making sense of problems and persevering to solving them. A key indicator itself is needed right there. And this last one I love is looking for and making sense of structure. All of these mathematical practices it doesn't take the teacher out of the role. It allows the teacher to model and step back. And so one of my takeaways whenever I'm talking with administrators or teachers is to fight, I'll say, or advocate for, in every classroom, posters around the room for mathematical practices, teachers teaching that, and students engaging in inquiry type practices that push towards mathematical practices and the understanding of it. As early as kindergarten, students should be engaged in mathematical practices. And so how does that look for kindergarten on through 12th grade? Math talks and discussions. There's lots of books out there that really prepares teachers to be able to throw a problem out to kids and have kids persevere to get through the answers. Using tools effectively. Not all tools will work for a particular problem, but students being able to think through, why did I use this tool versus this tool? Will this tool always work or not work? And then critique and reasoning each other in terms of if a student is using a tool, if they're having a math discussion, other students being able to ask the question, what made you get to that answer? And the student is being able to say, this is the steps that I took to get there. Understanding the structure, and then a mathematical room being inquiry based. I always say, and you know, this doesn't happen by chance, but a math classroom has to be built and developed for this type of structure to happen. Look at this problem right here. I'm not going to ask you to think through all of them, but I'll give you 10 seconds just to think through. If you were given this expression, what strategy would you use to solve 4 times 4? What strategy would you use to solve 4 times 4? Take 5 seconds. For many people who, when I'm doing this professional development face to face, they'll use different types of strategies. They'll use rote counting in terms of 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. They'll use 4, counting 4 multiple times. They'll know multiplication, so a multiplication table. And so why am I asking you this? Because an expression like this is really essential for, and this is a second grade, end of the second grade expression that a teacher can put on the board for a math talk and say, solve this equation, solve this problem, and then talk it through. What type of strategy did you use to solve this? Will this strategy or tool always work? Why or not work? A simple 5 to 10 minute math talk that really builds volume when it comes to teaching students academic discourse within the classroom. Okay, so think about the college and career readiness framework. And then, and so right here, because of our time, I'm going to move past this one a little bit because I want to get to our next slide. This slide right here is extremely important for questions to push towards student thinking with the mathematical practices. And so with these questions on the side right here, these questions are geared towards teachers teaching students how to think through the mathematical practices, and it's also used for students to question their peers for mathematical practices. So we'll see right here with 1 through 4, mathematical practices, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. These are the types of questions that should be happening within our classroom. Does your answer make sense? What do you notice about this problem? This one question around what do you notice about this problem allows students to be able to look at it, take a few minutes, and to think about what's happening in this problem. What do I notice? What do I need to do to solve it? All the way to questions around model with mathematics. What equations represent your drawing? What number represents blank in your picture? So being able to look at it and to model their representation of a math problem is really key. And I always say when I leave this one slide is to really give teachers the tools to be able to ask the types of questions that when they're engaging in math talks. So it's interesting that when students are engaging in that they're able to play math as free as possible. I'm sorry, math games as free as possible. And many times when students approach a math game or when they approach any type of game, they understand the rule that they can fail and I don't give up. I'm just going to try again and I'm going to learn from it. But then sometimes when they approach the classroom and the classroom still has the same mechanism, you're going to approach a math problem and you may fail at it, but the goal is that you're going to get up and you're going to learn from it. Then sometimes we see that students struggle with it and they give up. So I always pose the question, why is it easier for students to fail in a game and they learn and they learn the key dispositions and skills needed, but then when they approach a math problem, those skills don't necessarily transfer. One of my pushes is that for educators, we have to give students the ability to play some of the mathematical games within our classrooms and to teach those dispositions within the math games and to transfer those dispositions in math talks within our classroom. Mathematical takeaways. Grappling to make sense of math is an important tool. We know that when students enter classrooms, they don't necessarily they think of grappling as something that's bad. And so, and I always ask teachers when I'm working with teachers to allow students to be able to grapple with it. Teach the norm that grappling is important. Teach the norm that perseverance is really essential for solving math problems. And then allow students to engage with the task. And then after they engage with it, as the educator, you can step back and think about, how do we solve this problem? What dispositions did we need to solve this math problem? One was resiliency, one was perseverance, which is a mathematical practice. ELA in college and career readiness. So students are on track or ready for college and career readiness in ELA when we say, I won't read through all of these because you'll have the slides also for your perusal. But this one indicator right here, when they read and comprehend a range of sufficiently complex text independently, that's extremely essential. It's essential that teachers, when they're doing their read alouds and when they're doing their small groups, their literature circles, that they're exposing kids to it and that they're allowing kids to grapple with text independently. Oftentimes we hear that the educator may say, I have students reading at a S level when this text is at a Z level. My response is it's totally okay, because if you're doing it as a read aloud, you're giving a high level of support to kids that when they approach that level that's a little bit challenging, that they're able to tackle it. This right here really builds towards, and we've seen this one bracket right here on the side, but one indicator that I'm going to say here for shifts that's needed for college and career readiness is this staircase of complexity. That as educators, that yes, it's important to know the levels of where kids are, but then it's important to be able to expose kids to complex text as an educator, within a small group, and then independently. And when they're exposed independently, I'm conferring with them to determine if they understand it, if they can tackle the discipline, and then what do I need to do to teach that. So we talked about math talks math seminars, things like that, that needs to happen within classrooms to really prepare kids for the academics that's needed. In an ELA classroom, there are some strategic practices that when I'm working with educators, I always say must. It should be in our classrooms. Socratic seminars or dialogues, discussion dialogues within classrooms, book talks, kids being able to determine their evidence from a text and developing sound arguments that's needed. It doesn't come easily, but if it's taught, then even if students don't master it within that grade level, a trajectory to where kids are doing this as early as kindergarten is needed so that when they finish, they've got this kind of muscle that's needed to build evidence and to argue and refute their claims. We've seen this right here in terms of this qualitative, quantitative reader and task. And so right here, I'm just going to ask you for 10 seconds. And I was going to ask you to look at text 1 and text 2, but for 10 seconds or 5 seconds, read text 2 for me. We see that text 2 is more complex than text 1. One is because the way the words, and if you, and really, I'm sorry, text 1 and text 2 is really speaking the same language, but text 2 is more complex because of the language, or the way the words are put on the page in terms of more dialogue that's there. Vocabulary is a little bit more advanced here. And so when I'm working with educators, I always say, if you have the opportunity to teach text 1 or text 2, go for text 2, because text 2 allows for more complex work with more complex text. And it also means that as an educator that I need to really look at my text to determine what's the shift that's there, what's the vocabulary that's there, that I can't choose a text just because it's a good text and I've always used it every year, but I need to think about the vocabulary that's there, the way the words are printed on the page. I need to think through that, or the task that the text is going to ask kids to really be able to think through and to really analyze to get towards these college and career readiness. So important shifts in teacher practice that needs to happen. In ELA and mathematics, that when they're approaching a text, that they're looking at it and thinking about, does this text align to the college and career and the Common Core shifts that's needed to really push my kids to be CCR ready, and the demands of the text. What is this text going to demand that my students be able to push through and out of their comfort zone to understand this text? Sometimes as educators, we've seen this, we speak towards obstacles. And when I show this slide, I say, yes, if you see these as an obstacle, they'll become an obstacle. Culture. Well, this culture is not exposed to this type of language structure, so I can't expose it to them. Instead of seeing it as an obstacle, see it as an opportunity in terms of, okay, maybe this culture has not been exposed to this, but now I'm going to expose them to them, and these are the strategic steps that I'm going to take to make sure that they can access this. Courage is really key. And so this speaks to courage of kids to be able to tackle it and the courage of the teacher to be able to persevere with teaching it. Obstacle, they don't have the ability or the disposition to tackle this text. To an opportunity, they may not have it, but I'm going to teach them before I enter this text. It's okay for me to teach the dispositions that they needed. Students, when you enter this, a growth mindset is key to enter this text. We've heard a lot around growth mindset and fixed mindset. I won't go through all of these, but I am going to just go through this one. I'll take us back here. That whenever we're teaching these dispositions, it's always really essential to really work through building a growth mindset within our classrooms to be able to tackle this text. And so I've gone through a lot within the PowerPoint. You'll have it, but I want to save some time for questions in terms of what questions do you have around what's been presented here. And if you can put them in the question box, and then Arlen will read them out.
All right, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Arlen.
We will wait to see if any questions pop in.
Okay.
Again, you can download the PowerPoint from the chat pod on the right-hand side of your screen. Just open up that chat pod and you'll see the link to download it from Dropbox. Okay, we've got a question here from Matthew. He's in a K-5 building. How do you start getting teachers on board with the growth mindset?
Oh, great. That's a great question. I remember as administrator, I was an administrator of a K-8 building. And so one thing that we did was we introduced the text that I have here, one of the Carol Dweck's texts, and that text was really essential to first build teachers' knowledge, as I go back, mindset. And really around, and we read it as a book club. So before we wanted to introduce it to kids, we read it as a book club for teachers. And in that book club, we asked teachers to really speak towards where they had a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, because a lot of the research of Dweck says that growth and fixed it can be in one individual. Sometimes we operate from this one and the other one. And so then after teachers were able to really talk through this, then we talked about what type of strategies do we need to really teach students, and then where within our instructional day can we teach growth mindset. So for our building, we built it into 3 indicators. One was in the objectives. So when teachers spoke towards the objectives for the day, they would integrate growth mindset in that. So for example, when teachers would say, scholars, today you're going to work on ask and answer questions. In order to meet this standard, I'm going to ask you to have a growth mindset. Here's what's needed. And so teachers kept continuously voicing growth mindset over. Then when we had assessments too, before we took our assessments for our interim assessments, teachers would speak towards this growth mindset. So we asked teachers during the book club, while we were reading it, to really graft in our book club discussions, where can we generate growth mindset strategies throughout our instructional day? Then we center down to 2 to 3 each quarter to build that practice.
All right, very good. Thank you, Crystal.
Great.
I don't see any other questions coming in. We do have a couple more minutes. Crystal, is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our participants?
So the one around growth mindset, I'll talk for a minute about that. I think for growth mindset, sometimes where I see growth mindset go awry is when teachers own it, because I think that was an excellent question that was asked, and it doesn't transition to students. And so for many schools that we've been working with, it's in the bulletin boards, it's ingrained within the conversations of teachers. We revisit it during our PLCs. We talk about it within our students, like if we're having assemblies. There are several schools that start an assembly in terms of, when we have this assembly, I want you to have this growth mindset. So it's ingrained within the conversations throughout the building. So I think that's it, Arlen.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's right at 11 o'clock Central Time for us here. If do you have a contact information on your last slide that you could put up for us, Crystal?
I do. So here's contact information. If you have additional questions, you want to continue this dialogue, I get right back to you within 24 hours.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for the information sharing with us today, Crystal. I really appreciated the presentation. And I appreciate all of you who also logged in to experience this webinar for us today. Visit edleadersnetwork.org for more webinars like these. You are free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the session. Thanks, everyone, and take care and have a great rest of your day.